Global warming. Is it causing chaos and economic devastation worldwide? That's what activists at the U.S. Federal Reserve want you to believe. Our next guest says he's done his own research. He's found the Fed and others are full of hot air. David Barker is a former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and partner in the Barker Companies. David, thanks for being here. So first, remind us of what the Fed and other climate change advocates are saying about the effects of warming on global economies.
Well, the Federal Reserve has done a couple of studies that they claim show that higher temperatures will lead to lower economic growth. And of course, growth is important. If we have economic growth, then in the future, everyone will be a lot wealthier. So if higher temperatures would affect growth, that would be a serious problem.
But you say other countries, maybe not so much so. They highlight a number of them. So how is this affecting loans and the flow of money?
Oh, well, so the Federal Reserve wants to use climate change as they want to force banks to look at their climate risk, and which I believe will lead eventually to lending restrictions. Policy, the Federal Reserve is trying to make climate policy through the banking system.
Well, what are some of the countries that they're talking about here, and what is the problem with it?
Well, so the research that they did was looking both at state-by-state data in the United States and country-by-country data around the world. And when I looked carefully at that research, there were all kinds of problems. So, for example, every country in the world was weighted equally. China weighted the same as St. Vincent, a tiny country in the Caribbean. And a few small countries have very unusual economic circumstances. Some might have giant oil discoveries in a year that happened to be a little bit cooler than average. Other countries had catastrophes that had nothing to do with climate change. But those small countries threw the statistical results off. They used very sophisticated statistical techniques, but those small countries magnified the effects that they were looking for. And when I made some very simple and reasonable adjustments, their results went away.
Well, I know I've been to a lot of these countries, and one, for example, Sudan. And I noticed 30 years I've been going to Sudan, and nothing has changed. I mean, people were starving back 30 years ago. They still are today. It's just the way their climate is there, and they've cut down all the trees. So how much of this is legitimate, though? Is there a legitimate concern here?
No. When I looked carefully at the data and corrected some of the errors in the Fed studies, there was no effect at all of temperature on economic growth. Again, it was driven by a few outlier countries that were affected by factors completely unrelated to climate change.
Well, how does all this credit system then come in, where you buy credits and like you said, China is given the same type of treatment as the United States when they're one of the greatest polluters out there?
Well, yes, that's an important issue, that no matter what we do, if the rest of the world doesn't take climate change seriously and continues with the current practices, then what we do will have no effect at all, even if you accept the premises behind the climate change movement.
What else did you find, David, in your research?
Well, I found basically that there was that there's no reason to fear economic catastrophe from climate change. Some of the best research that has been done on the economic effects of temperature were by William Nordhaus, Nobel Prize-winning economist. Now, he believes in doing some things about climate change, but his research shows that it's not a coming catastrophe. And if you think about economic growth, if we continue to have normal economic growth over the next several decades, that will completely swamp any effect of climate change. In other words, if climate change might reduce GDP by a few percentage points, 2% growth a year for the next 80 years will mean that we're all 5 times richer in the future than we are now. And so being 4.9 times richer instead of 5.1 times richer is not a catastrophe.
I think maybe the debt ceiling and our budget here in the U.S. Should be more of a concern. So what response did you receive from the Fed and others when you pointed out the errors in their findings and their advocacy?
No response at all. In fact, my findings were published in an academic peer-reviewed journal called Econ Journal Watch, which the mission of that journal is to publish critiques of articles that are in other academic journals. And that journal provides space for authors who are critiqued to respond. And that offer continues to be open, but not a word from the Fed, and not a word from most of the press either. They lavished attention on these studies when they were first published, but there has been no news coverage of the fact that they've been debunked.
And you have a PhD. Have your writings been peer reviewed?
Yes, yes. And in fact, these papers that critiqued the Federal Reserve were peer reviewed, and I have published peer reviewed research on other topics also.
So, David, finally, is this all about money?
Well, there certainly is money to be made on climate change. There are companies that are manufacturing all sorts of things that they hope to promote, of course, including electric vehicles, solar farms, windmills, heat pumps, all kinds of things like that. And so it's certainly worth considering that when there's a group pushing an agenda like this and there is money to be made, whether there's a connection there.
Okay, we've got about 30 seconds. What do we do about it?
Well, I think the important thing is to question what we're told on things like this, and to look carefully. Open the hood on this research and find the flaws, because otherwise people can publish papers, claim that they are authoritative, and no one questions them, and it's very difficult to work against that. So I think it's very important to look carefully at that research and find the flaws in it.
A lot of disinformation out there that we have to weed our way through. Okay, David Barker, former Federal Reserve economist and partner of Barker Companies. Thank you, David, for taking the time to share your insights. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Memorial Day is a time when Americans remember their war dead. But what about those who fought and survived? Those veterans who now suffer from disabilities, PTSD, or die from suicide. Many veterans and their families are still facing hardship and suffering on this Memorial Day weekend and every day. Here's a look back at a conversation with Michael Reagan, the son of America's 40th president. Mr. Reagan is president of the Reagan Foundation, a best-selling author and syndicated columnist. Michael, always good to talk with you. I want to discuss the Legacy Foundation and what you're doing to honor your dad and veterans. But first, your father. He held a special place in his heart for American war heroes and servicemen and women. What would he think about the way our veterans are being treated today? Or should I say mistreated?
I think he'd be very upset. He was very upset back in the 1970s, the way they were being treated, especially when they came home from Vietnam. And he did something about that. And he would make sure that our veterans were treated with great respect. Those who are coming home, those who are here, that need really all the help they can get, especially when you have so many committing suicide on a regular basis, up 46% in this last year. He would try to get to the bottom of it and say, what can we do to help these vets? And I think people really need to understand. I think what he would tell people is you need to remember vets, not 3 days a year. You need to remember vets 365 days a year. And unfortunately, we only do it 3 days instead of 365 days. But we need to think about that all the time, not just part of the time.
I know some friends of Gold Star families have expressed concern that illegal immigrant families separated from their children at the U.S. southern border are being awarded nearly $1 million, while family members of U.S. servicemen killed in Afghanistan receive only about $100,000 death gratuity. What does this say about government's attitude towards our servicemen and women and veterans?
Well, in the world of defund the police, is anybody really surprised by any of this that's going on, where you really lack respect for those who are in fact protecting us, and you have all this disdain for them and the people of America while reaching out? And it's really all about elections. It's all about bringing people in here, giving them money to get them to vote, so it keeps you in power for a much longer period of time. And we just can't afford to allow these people to be in power that length of time. We need to do something about it. We need to have a voice. We need to say something. We need to stand up and say, I've taken all I'm going to take, and really get involved. And don't sit back and say, well, it doesn't mean anything if I vote. It means a lot if you vote. You need to show up.
And I know you're doing a lot to help our veterans. Please tell us what you are doing to help with your Walkway to Victory program.
Actually, Walkway to Victory is a great program we started a few years ago. We started with the Reagan Legacy Foundation supplying scholarships to the men and women aboard the USS Ronald Reagan. That's where this flight jacket comes from. They made it for me. And it's been a great program ever since the early 2000s when we christened the USS Ronald Reagan in 2001 in Norfolk. And since then, we've kind of expanded it. And you might remember my father was the first president to actually speak at Normandy on D-Day. And since then, every other president's gone to Normandy on a D-Day of their administration and, in fact, spoken. And people love him and really respect him for what he's done for the World War II vets. And remember, my dad did 300 films during that period of time, teaching kids how to use a parachute, how to swim, all these other programs that he did during the Second World War. And so I thought, what could we do to honor his memory and legacy of how well he felt about those who served and honor those who did serve back in the Second World War. And so we created the Walkway to Victory at St. Mary Église, Normandy, France. It's an unbelievable place for the 101st and 82nd Airborne. It's their Gettysburg, if you will. And we thought about putting together a walkway where people could go online, buy a brick, and have it inlaid in the ground at St. Mary Église to remember that person who, in fact, served in the European theater during the Second World War. And we're up to now somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 bricks have been laid. People put the names of their loved one, grandparents, whatever it might be, who served. And those who don't know someone can go to ReaganLegacyFoundation.org and or send a check to us, put in the memo, Brick Project, and we will find a World War II vet that served the European theater, put his name on it or her name on it, put it in the ground and lay it in the ground, and then send you the information so you know exactly who you sponsored for people to remember that's there at St. Mary Église at the Walkway to Victory, in the Walkway to Victory at the Airborne Museum.
Michael Reagan, president of the Reagan Foundation, author and syndicated columnist. Thank you, Michael, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
The British government has banned a Christian math teacher for refusing to call a student by their preferred pronoun. A Department of Education teaching regulation conduct panel has ruled that 33-year-old Joshua Sutcliffe acted unprofessionally, and they've prohibited him indefinitely from teaching. Despite requests for leniency and the testimony of several witnesses vouching for his good character, the panel ordered Sutcliffe be banned from teaching without review for at least 2 years. The Secretary of State for Education said the government's action is in the public's interest to, quote, maintain confidence in the profession. The decision comes more than 5 years after a classroom incident where Sutcliffe referred to a biological female transgender student as she. Here's the former Christian math teacher, Josh Sutcliffe, who says he tried to be careful to avoid using any pronouns.
I know it's a sensitive issue, and I didn't want it to affect the learning environment. And so I continued with that sort of position. This student started a particular lesson well recently, and of course I was thrilled. And you know, to be a good teacher, you must encourage your students. And so I said, absolutely fantastic job, girls. You've done a really good start there.
Accused of misgendering, Sutcliffe has fought this battle to get his job back ever since. He alleges that he was targeted for his Christian beliefs because he ran a popular after-school Bible club attended by more than 100 students. Everything he did and posted to social media came under scrutiny by teachers and students. The school shut the Bible club down. Christian Concern Chief Executive Andrea Williams defended him at his hearing last January.
He comes here as a man who manifests his faith, who loves the Lord Jesus, who loves his students, who loves to teach maths. But because he's a vocal Christian and manifests Christian views on sexual ethics, on Christian morality, that he has found himself deemed as someone for whom it's questionable whether or not he should ever be in a classroom again. Well, I say that Joshua is exactly the kind of young man that we need in the classroom.
Amen to that. Sutcliffe is appealing the teaching ban. Meanwhile, new Department of Education guidelines may warn teachers against socially transitioning children who question their gender. It now appears the government is starting to realize that allowing students to change their names and pronouns to match their preferred gender causes psychological harm. Folks, at a time when 45% of the people in Britain say they're either atheists or non-religious, don't you think they need more moral leaders, people of faith like Josh Sutcliffe in their classrooms and positions of leadership in the UK? Embracing Judeo-Christian values would turn things around, not only for people in Britain, but also right here in the USA. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on the CBN News and NRB channels, YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, and our broadcast affiliates. And until next time, be blessed.